I do want to use the expertise of two of my colleagues again today to explain one story of what happened and why it's significant, and that is Hong Kong. We had with us yesterday Laura Westbrook. She's back with us again today, and really just back from Hong Kong a number of days, Laura. And also Kerry Allen from BBC Monitoring, who looks at Chinese media and how they're covering events. Because if you were with us yesterday, it was quite dramatic what was happening in the territory. There was a number of protesters that broke into the Legislative Council, it's also known as LegCo, to occupy it and to protest what they feel is the wrong leader. Her name is Carrie Lam. She's the chief executive. They feel she is too friendly, too close with Beijing, and instead they want more independence from China. We saw when there was tear gas being dispersed that then the demonstrators decided to flee, and it already started over that controversial extradition bill which we've talked about, that would have allowed people to be extradited to mainland China much more easily than it happens right now. So let's go through a little of what it looks like today. Laura, how would you describe, from what you're seeing, what's happened in Hong Kong today, the fallout, the aftermath?
What strikes me today is just how defiant these young protesters are. They've been sharing photos on social media saying that they paid for their drinks when they were inside LegCo, that they didn't destroy any of the antiques in there. Very much sort of being quite defiant, in stark contrast to the what the government has come out and said. And even what also is interesting is that the organisers of that peaceful protest that was going on alongside what was happening at LegCo, they've come out just in the last few minutes on BBC World News, and they've said that they don't actually condemn them, that they understand why these protesters are so angry, and that it's because Carrie Lam, Hong Kong's leader, has continued to ignore their demands to withdraw this bill and resign. But also it does beg the question that one of the slogans of these protests is add oil. Have they added too much oil and risked playing into playing into the hands of Beijing, which has come out today and very much said they want to throw the book at these protesters and prosecute them?
Well, let's cross over to Kerry. What are you seeing in Chinese media?
Well, yes, I mean, very strong statements by the Foreign Ministry about this, but it's not front page news. I mean, basically, mainland China regards Hong Kong as just a region, like small time politics, really. I mean, they've been saying throughout these protests ever since they started in early June that they've really been playing them down. They've either been censoring them, or they've been saying that far fewer people have been participating than we've seen recorded. I mean, we've seen hundreds of thousands to millions of people, whereas they've been saying it's only been tens of thousands at any given time. So yeah, Beijing has not been making a big deal of this, and in fact, some papers today in the mainland, what they're doing instead is, I mean, People's Daily's overseas edition, which actually gets distribution in Hong Kong. I mean, this is the mouthpiece newspaper of the Chinese government. They've got a picture of people assembled in a little formation so that they read the words "I love Hong Kong" in terms of like the way they're standing, and it says 22 years old, happy birthday. So they're still talking about positivity with the handover anniversary. So very, very different tone to what Hong Kong papers are saying.
And I think probably one of the pictures that managed to make its way into the global media was that emblem of Hong Kong that had been defaced with black paint, basically by graffiti. And I'm wondering how those pictures of whether it's some of this LegCo, as it's called, or Legislative Council building being defaced or something smashed up, how that is going down in Hong Kong as you see it, Laura.
Yes, it is going to be interesting to see how the wider public views this, but the sense that I'm getting, which is also quite interesting, is that we've had the organisers of this peaceful process, as I said, they've not come out and condemn it. The pro-democracy lawmakers, which are the opposition camp, have also made a statement today saying that they understand the level of anger that these protesters used, and that they haven't come out strongly condemning it. The pro-Beijing camp, they obviously have, and it is if you look at the level of violence and the unprecedented scenes that we saw there, you would think that there would be this strong condemnation across both camps, pro-Beijing or pro-democracy, and you're not seeing that. So that strikes me today.
Is there a generational divide?
I think what's happening is that there is this reaching out from the older generation to the younger generation, saying what they're most worried about is that if there is prosecutions, and there most likely will be, that these young people could face 10 years in prison. And I think that's what the older generation is very worried about, which is why you're not seeing this strong condemnation. They're trying to maybe push the government to maybe reach out to these students rather than throw the book at them.
Now, Carrie Lam, who is the chief executive, as a leader, I suppose, of the authorities within Hong Kong, might be the simplest way of putting it. She gave a press conference at 4 a.m.
She did. We were both watching it, me and Laura. Yeah.
So talk us through what you think was achieved or not achieved.
Well, the thing that was most striking to me is just listening to the language she was using. I mean, really strongly condemning, the attacks on the government buildings and, the violence. This was language that I thought, this is going to be picked up by, communist media without a doubt. And lo and behold, today CCTV has shared footage of this, of the press conference. And it's worth noting that where they're stood as well, there's none of the graffiti that we saw inside the building. I mean, we saw literally in Chinese on every single wall, the officials are dogs, the government are dogs. This phrase just repeated again and again and again. But, the government Beijing government would never allow, stuff like this, criticism of the government, to be seen. So they're stood in this kind of area where, you can't see any of the graffiti in the background. Carrie Lam is basically just talking about violent protesters. And it did feed into Beijing's dialogue on this, that basically what's happening is not a peaceful protest, it's hooliganism.
Do you think Hong Kongers stayed up to watch it?
It was streaming live on Twitter and Facebook, and I was monitoring whether people were reacting to it. I think people woke up to the news, but I don't think it's a surprise. As Carrie was saying, Carrie Lam was very much talking up to Beijing. She wasn't talking down to the protesters. She was saying that she reiterated that Hong Kong is a lawful society, Hong Kong has rule of law, and I think it will feed into the frustrations of these protesters who Carrie Lam has not met yet. She, up until this protest, up until this speech, she had not appeared in public for 10 days. She did say, however, that she was open to meeting people, and it will be interesting to see whether she actually does that, because that is what a lot of these young protesters have come out today saying, that they want her to speak to them directly. They want to have a dialogue with her, and that could be a way that she could maybe move forward and stop some of this anger that's going on in Hong Kong. It'll be interesting to see whether that happens, though.
It seems to be as well that the protesters pick their moments in a way, like maybe nothing happening today, regroup, and then we just don't know where it begins again.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's entirely possible that, there's a lot of anger to the extradition bill being suspended. I mean, we were talking about last night, the fact that doesn't mean anything really. They could basically, it doesn't mean that it's going to be cancelled, and was it like next year, it could just, all start all over again. That wouldn't kind of...
Their biggest worry is that it could come back, and that's why they have been continuously asking for it to be withdrawn. But I think the main question is what last night shows, and what people in Hong Kong today are wondering is, did they go too far last night, and what are the repercussions going to be? Because I think what last night showed was how deeply polarized and divided Hong Kong is. On one side you have Carrie Lam refusing to back down, on the other you have these protesters who are still very angry. And yes, there's no protest planned as yet, but these protests are very spontaneous, very organic. I don't think it's quite over yet.
I was speaking to our colleague Grace Thoy, who is in Hong Kong. They are expecting arrests in the coming hours, so we'll keep across it. Kerry Allen, Laura Westbrook, follow them both on Twitter. I do. Thanks very much for coming back to us.